Good evening, folks. My name is Pat Moylan, Dairy Advisor here in Kilkenny. And we're here tonight just to have a host a Teagasc Journal webinar on multi-species swards. We were planning to have this on farm, but due to circumstances beyond our control, it's not possible, but hopefully you'll gain a lot from tonight's talk. I'm delighted to welcome on board Dr. Mary McAvoy from Germany, who will give her insight at the very beginning onto the growing of multi-species sward species and what the key things to look at picking seed varieties and mixtures. I'm also joined by our host farmer of the night, Jack Healy from Clone in Ballyragget. So thanks to Jack for coming on board and giving his time. And I'll conclude tonight's talk looking at the new multi-species Department of Agriculture scheme, which is a very attractive scheme offering €300 a hectare to grow a multi-species sward in 2023. So before we begin, you'll see there at the end of the screen, there's a Q&A box there where you can type in your questions all times during the meeting, and we will endeavour to answer those questions for you on the multi-species itself. We're looking at all aspects. So look, that's really it. Hopefully you'll enjoy the next 45 minutes or so. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dr. Mary McAvoy from Journal up there in Tipperary, who will share her insights and her experiences of multi-species sward. So over to you, Mary.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be speaking on the webinar here this evening. So I'm just going to give a brief run through, I suppose, some of the reasons why we're looking at multi-species swards, what we're talking about when we're discussing multi-species swards. So what should be in the makeup of our swards for grazing systems in particular, and a small bit then on establishment and management of your multi-species swards. So firstly, why grow a multi-species swards? So we've seen significant increase in the interest in multi-species swards, and I suppose this is coming from a number of different reasons. The department had a multi-species scheme available there last year, and it's just been announced about 2 weeks ago, so it's open again this year. And a lot of people are looking at that in terms of, there's €300 per hectare per year available for the establishment of these swards. So I suppose it's a good way of, dipping your toe in the water and trying to see if they're going to work on your farm. The benefits of multi-species swards, they give good yield stability in drought, and a lot of farmers on drier ground have turned to multi-species swards to try to get through that mid-season period when often we see perennial ryegrass decline in terms of its yield because it's suffering from dry conditions. And I suppose some part of the country has had some level of a drought almost every year for the last 5 years. So it is becoming more of an issue on Irish farms without a doubt. The legume proportion of our multi-species are fixed in nitrogen. Clovers have the capacity to fix up to 150 kilos of nitrogen. So we're seeing increased dry matter yields with multi-species swards at much lower levels of nitrogen input compared to our standard perennial ryegrass swards. And I suppose it's fair to say the legume proportion within a multi-species sward is probably the most important aspect of it. So it's really, really important to have good establishment of your white and red clover as well if you have a second clover in there, because that's going to fix nitrogen. It's also going to improve the protein content of the sward. Clovers do better in drought conditions as well, so it's going to do a lot of heavy lifting, and it's also going to feed nitrogen both to your grasses and to your herbs. Okay, so the herbs that we're going to be looking at and talking about, such as plantain and chicory in particular, they do not fix nitrogen. They do require nitrogen to achieve their yield potential, so the clover is going to feed that nitrogen into the system. If we can reduce our nitrogen use, that obviously has the added benefit in terms of reducing nitrous oxide emissions and also nitrogen leaching. So that might be beneficial in terms of trying to reduce leaching into our waterways, so improve water quality. And obviously also if we're using less nitrogen, we've less emissions coming from NO2. Multi-species swards, they are good in terms of the quality. They are high protein feed, and what we also see is, I suppose they give the ability to go in at higher covers maybe than perennial ryegrass without compromising the quality of the feed in front of the cow. So we get very good flexibility in terms of grazing multi-species swards. We do see increased animal intake and performance with multi-species swards, and a lot of the work on this to date has been done with sheep and beef animals. We're also seeing some work now coming through from Teagasc Curtains and also from Johnstown Castle looking at dairy cow performance under multi-species swards, and we're starting to see benefits in that scenario as well. With the multi-species swards, okay, so when we go with more diverse mixtures, we're going to improve the soil structure and increase organic matter. And a lot of this is coming from the different root capabilities and rooting capacities of the different species. So perennial ryegrass has quite a shallow root system, as you're all pretty well aware. If we incorporate chicory and red clover, the two of them have quite a deep taproot, so they're going to work down much lower into the soil horizon compared to what perennial ryegrass will do. And plantain has a very good fibrous root as well, so it's going to deliver a lot in terms of just bringing increased biodiversity into the soil. And we do see, without a shadow of a doubt, improved soil structure where we have multi-species compared to perennial ryegrass only swards, in terms of, you know, better air and water movement through the soil, more friable soil, and also increased earthworm count in our soils, which are under multi-species compared to perennial ryegrass swards. So a lot of benefits to be gained by there. The department have issued the scheme for the coming year, and multi-species scheme they will support farmers up to the tune of €300 per hectare for the establishment of multi-species wards. So it's, you know, it's quite a significant amount of money, I suppose, and it will go a long way in terms of covering the cost of the seed, and maybe you'll have some left over to claim in terms of the contractor charges can also be claimed within this scheme as well. And obviously, you know, if we have a more diverse mixture, it's going to improve the biodiversity of our farms, and that's going to be very good in terms of, you know, the overall image of Irish agriculture. You know, it is something that we are often scrutinised for having a lot of perennial ryegrass dominated swards. If we can increase the diversity, it's going to be beneficial for our pollinators, and, you know, it's going to be beneficial in terms of the green image of Irish agriculture as well. So we talk about functional types. So we break our multi-species down into, you know, grasses, legumes, or herbs. And I suppose, you know, obviously I'm only putting up a small cohort of what's available and what can be used in our multi-species sward mixtures. But I suppose these are some of the more common species that farmers do look to. Okay. In terms of our grasses, it's generally perennial ryegrass. Timothy is quite a popular secondary grass, and cocksfoot to some degree. Cocksfoot, it's well known for its capacity to do well in very dry or drought-prone conditions, but palatability with cocksfoot can be an issue. So I suppose Timothy is a lot more palatable compared to cocksfoot, generally speaking, and that's why cocksfoot mightn't be in a huge number of mixtures out there, because if it gets strong, it can be very, very difficult to get animals to graze it down. The legumes, as I said already, a really, really important part of the mixture overall. White and red clover, you know, should be in any multi-species mixture, I suppose, as a baseline. And there are other clovers, such as Alseed clover, which does wet in quite challenging conditions. It's quite a hardy clover. Bird's foot trefoil, which a lot of you are aware of, and sandfine. Okay, but some of these other species, especially the bird's foot trefoil, the sandfine, and if we move over into the herb category there, the yarrow, the salad burnet, and sheep's parsley can be quite difficult to get established under intensive grazing scenarios. And you know, if they're not getting established, then they're not really going to contribute to the sward over time. So it is questionable whether it's worthwhile including them in the first place. Okay. In terms of the department scheme, and the main species that we're going to talk about here this evening, I think, will be perennial ryegrass and Timothy, white clover and red clover, and chicory and plantain. Okay, so the white clover, red clover, chicory and plantain are essential part of the department mixture, as is perennial ryegrass. And you also must include 0.7 kilos per acre of an alternative grass species. So it can be Timothy or cocksfoot. They're going to be the two most popular ones, and I think a lot of mixtures out there are leaning towards Timothy for its palatability benefits. Just a quick look at plantain and chicory. Okay, I'm going to assume most of you on this call are well aware as to what perennial ryegrass and probably Timothy look like. Plantain is on the picture on the left there, where you can see the soil with it. Also, this is after being dug up. Plantain has quite a fibrous root system. Okay, it's also known as ribgrass. So you can see the ribs. If you look closely there, you can see the ribs or the lines in the leaf of the plantain. So it's quite an easily identifiable plant. You'll often see it grown in hedgerows. A lot of people say they spent a long time trying to get rid of it out of fields, and now we're incorporating it back into fields. So it has a fibrous root, so again, a very different root structure compared to perennial ryegrass. Plantain grows well right across the season, but it does particularly well in the spring period. It's quite palatable to animals, and also it has a low dry matter, so it's known to have a diuretic effect. So essentially what that means is when animals are grazing swards with a high proportion of plantain, they're going to urinate more frequently, so we see less nitrogen being deposited per urine patch, and that's going to be beneficial in terms of, you know, reduced effect of nitrate leaching. Chicory is in the picture on the right hand side. Now that's more of a multi-species sward, but you can see the chicory. It looks like essentially like a salad leaf or a lettuce leaf. It's quite a large leaf, especially early on. The plants in the first year are quite dominant in a sward. Chicory has multiple benefits, I suppose. It puts down this deep taproot, does very well in dry conditions, so suits drier fields and drier farms, maybe more so than wetter fields. That deep taproot is going to help in terms of opening up the soil, helping air and water movement through the soil. Animals perform quite well when they're grazing chicory. Okay, so a deeper taproot is going to bring up more minerals, maybe from lower down the soil horizon, that mightn't necessarily be available when you're just talking about perennial ryegrass or ryegrass clover swards. So more benefits there. And it also has anti-helminthic benefits. So where animals are grazing swards with chicory, we do see a reduced worm burden, and work from Lyons Research Farm has shown in lambs grazing swards with chicory, in the lifetime of those lambs, they required 50% fewer worm drenches than those lambs which were grazing perennial ryegrass swards. So benefits there as we see a build up to in terms of resistance to a number of wormers on the market. Okay, and they're the two main herbs that are working really well under Irish conditions, and delivering a lot in terms of benefits to bring into farms. This is some work where we've looked at the seasonal yield profile of multi-species compared to perennial ryegrass swards. And the blue line, which is the base or the lower line there, that's a pure perennial ryegrass dominated sward. And it's just showing a typical yield profile of perennial ryegrass across the year. Okay, this sward did perform quite well, but you can see compared to the perennial ryegrass white clover sward, which is your orange line, or your 6-way multi-species mixture, which is your dark blue line, they performed significantly better than the perennial ryegrass across the season. So very little difference early in the season, but once we get past the middle of May, the perennial ryegrass white clover and the 6-way mixture performed a lot better than the perennial ryegrass only sward. So what we see is when we incorporate more species into the mixture, we get better seasonal yield profiles. So we get a more stable yield profile across the year. So that's going to be quite important on a lot of farms, and especially drier farms. It is going to deliver more feed and more reliable feed source right across the year. If we look at some additional work which we've done at our German Horizon research site, where we looked at species contribution over time, and I suppose this is one of the questions we often get asked is, will the herbs last in the sward? And if we look, I'm going to show you 2 years data. Firstly, I just want you to look at, cut one from the first sowing year. Okay, you can see perennial ryegrass, which is the green proportion of this pie chart here, is contributing about 30% to the mixture overall. Your chicory, which is that kind of pinky color there, and your plantain, which is your deep purple, are almost probably just shy of about 45% of the overall sward in that first cut from the year of sowing. Okay, and your clovers, which is that orange or tan line or section, is much smaller in terms of the contribution overall. By cut 4, the plantain and chicory continue to dominate the sward. At this stage, the weeds, which was the blue line in the previous graph, have been smothered out to some degree. The grass is still contributing and holding its own quite well there, and a slight increase, but not a significant increase in the proportion of clovers in that first sowing year. Okay, when we go to year 2, okay, and if we look firstly at cut 1, you can see in cut 1 of year 2, the perennial ryegrass, which is your green proportion, is dominating the mixture here, contributing about 55% to the sward overall. The chicory and plantain are still doing relatively well, accounting for probably about 30% overall. But as we go through that second year, the chicory in particular, which is our pink bar, starts to decrease in terms of its overall contribution to the sward, and we're seeing a significant increase in our red clover, which is our yellow bar, and our white clover, which is the tan line there. So the clovers are increasing quite significantly as we move into the middle of the second harvest year, whereas our chicory is starting to decline. And this is what we're seeing quite a lot out on farms. We're essentially getting chicory lasting 2 years in the sward, and after that its proportion starts to decline. And often in year 2, farms will report, that the chicory isn't really contributing a huge amount, and we're not seeing much chicory on farms after year 3. Plantain tends to hold its own a little bit better. Plantain will probably continue to contribute for 4 years before it starts to decline and die out of the population. But overall, what you want when we get to the into year 3 or into year 4 of our multi-species sward is a good perennial ryegrass sward, which also has a good proportion of clover, and you'll end up with a perennial ryegrass white clover sward essentially after year 5, And I suppose that's not necessarily a bad thing to have, because if we continue to maintain a good perennial ryegrass white clover sward, that's going to give us a lot of the benefits that we're well aware that we can achieve with white clover swards. We do see increased animal performance, increased animal intake with grass white clover swards over perennial ryegrass only swards. So it's not like we have to go and start again and reseed these. We can continue to manage them as grass and white clover swards after year 4 or 5. In terms of establishment of multi-species swards, and I know we're going to talk about this probably in a little bit more detail with Jack, but it is important that we choose fields with a low weed burden. Once we sow our multi-species swards, we have no opportunity for weed control once that sward's been established. So there's no option for post-emergence weed control or subsequent weed control. So we need to make sure we're putting it into fields which aren't going to create big problems with docks or thistles, okay? So control your weeds prior to sowing. And I suppose if there is fields that have a bit of a weed problem, maybe you want to consider controlling those weeds this year and put your multi-species in next year, okay? Roundup is going to be important again to eliminate, weed grasses that are in the sward, but also to eliminate any dock problem that you have there as well, okay? Choose fertile fields, ideally a pH of 6.5, P&K index 3. Your plantains and chicories, so your herbs and clovers do have a high requirement for soil fertility. And if that isn't right, they're not going to even last as long as what we're hoping to get out of them in terms of 3 to 5 years. So it is important that we have good soil pH and good P&K index. Spring sown is ideal. You wouldn't go sowing too much there today. It's been very, very cold again here today. But ideally, April into May sowing is ideal for these multi-species swards. It gives them a good chance to get well established through the summer. So when we come into the cooler temperatures in the autumn, they have, a well-developed root, and they're performing quite well as a plant. Okay, if we sow them too late into the autumn, we do see compromised results in terms of their establishment. So we would very much encourage a spring sowing versus an autumn sowing with our multi-species swards. And the easiest way to get them established is as part of a full reseed. A lot of people ask about oversowing multi-species into the sward. We do see mixed results. It is working on some farms, it's not working on more farms, but the multi-species, so your herb component and your clovers as well, they're a lot more expensive than the grass component in a multi-species. Okay, so if it is more expensive, and also when we're talking about oversown, we need to go at higher rates. So if you're putting in more expensive seed at higher rate, if it doesn't work, it's a higher cost overall. So the best way to get it established is as part of a full reseed. In terms of management, for the first grazing, ideally you want to have six leaves on your plantain and 7 leaves on your chicory, okay? And that just allows, before we go in and take that first grazing, the plant to have put some energy down into its root, to have developed its root a little bit. So when we graze off that leaf, there's energy there in the root that it can recuperate and put more leaf back up in front of the cow again for the subsequent rotation. They probably do like a relatively similar management to grass sward. So we're going to talk about rotational grazing. So ideally grazing for 1 to 3 days. Any longer than that, and you're going to see selective grazing of the herbs, and the animals are probably going to go too hard on some of the herbs, and it might compromise their longer term consistency. And ideally, rest them for, look, it depends on the farm, but most people rest them for anywhere between 21 or 23 days and maybe up to 25 or 28 days. So take a slightly longer rest period than our typical perennial ryegrass sward, okay? Tactical application of nitrogen is important in the spring. So your clovers aren't going to do a huge amount in terms of fixing nitrogen until we get to that May period. So in order to make sure we've adequate feed in front of animals, it is going to, the wise thing to do essentially is go out with some nitrogen in the spring, and then once clover starts fixing nitrogen and growing well in May, then we can reduce our nitrogen thereafter. Maintaining P&K indexes and drip feeding P&K into the plants over the year will be of benefit to them. We want to avoid overgrazing, so don't graze them as tight as we're grazing our perennial ryegrass swards. Ideally grazing down to maybe 6 centimeters, so you're leaving a little bit of the plant behind, you're not going too hard on it. They can be cut for silage. I suppose that's a question we often get. Can we cut them for silage if they get too strong? They can be cut for silage is the answer. They do require a longer wilt, so you want to probably leave them for 48 hours on the ground in good conditions, because they are lower in dry matter, and if you try bale them up too quickly, you're going to have a lot of losses out of that bale. So give them a good wilt, lose some of that moisture out of it, and they do preserve quite well. They mightn't look great in the bale, but they do feed out very, very well to animals afterwards. This is the multi-species mixture which Daphne has specified needs to be the minimum which we sow, and I think we'll talk about this later, Pat, in your presentation, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. But as a minimum, we need to have 6.6 kilos of perennial ryegrass, and those must be on the recommended list. You need 0.7 kilo of another grass. It doesn't necessarily need to be timothy. It needs to be another grass which isn't perennial ryegrass. 1.5 kilos of white clover and 1.5 kilos of red clover. And again, the white clover must be off the Irish National Recommended List. 1 kilo of plantain and 0.7 kilo of chicory. So 12 kilo makes up the base mixture. There is a little bit more leeway within the scheme this year that if you want to put in extra herbs or extra clovers, you can do that. But the 12 kilos is the base mixture on a per acre basis. Okay. Just to quickly summarise, I suppose, clover's doing a lot of the heavy lifting in these multi-species swards, and we have a well-developed management blueprint for clover at this point in time, okay? But multi-species swards do without a doubt have a role. There are brilliant definite soil benefits, and I think, a lot of these are still probably anecdotal. We haven't seen a huge amount of work in terms of research work measuring what's happening below the ground. UCD are starting to do some work, but there is definite soil benefits. We're seeing healthier soils. We're seeing more earthworms in multi-species soils compared to perennial ryegrass swards. There is definite animal health and performance benefits. But it is important when you're putting them in, to consider the most appropriate feed for your multi-species. Okay, so you want to put the multi-species into fields with a low weed burden. You want to make sure you're putting them into soils which have good soil fertility, and you don't want to put them into fields which are going to hold a lot or maybe have water lined on them over the winter. Okay, so you want fields that are well able to drain. That would be important with your multi-species swards. Look, Pat, I'm going to leave it there. I'll hand it back over to yourself.
So thanks very much, Mary, for the whole, I suppose, agronomy of the multi-species swards and your experiences and information. Very valuable so far. So I'm not sure, Michael Fitzgerald, are any questions there at the moment in the background?
No questions. Slow on coming in there. Just throw in just one for myself there. In terms of keeping fertility on any of these established swards, the use of slurry, parlour washings, and any opinions on that, Mary?
Yeah, look, I mean, slurry will be beneficial in terms of feeding P's and K's, especially back into your multi-species sward. So that's going to go a long way. And I suppose, look, I mean, it's about, I suppose, for your slurry picking which field is going to be more, you're going to get the biggest benefit to having to putting out your slurry on your farm. So slurry does suit silage ground particularly well, as well. So maybe it's going to be slurry going back to silage ground, and a bagged P and K with a 0N product going out onto your multi-species sward. But yeah, without a doubt, the slurry going out on them will be of benefit.
Okay, Mary, just one question coming in there. You spoke there about perennial ryegrass being in the mix. Is there any preference for diploid or tetchploid or one of each, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, look, I mean, I suppose you'd still be kind of recommending maybe, one of each, because at the end of the day, we're in 4 or 5 years' time when there's not much left in the sward patch, bar your perennial ryegrass and your clovers. You want to make sure that you have good perennial ryegrasses going into the mixture in the first place. So, at a minimum, make sure they're on the recommended list, and they have to be if your son or applying for the department scheme. But again, pick the better varieties off the recommended list when you are putting in these mixtures. So I'd probably go with a 50-50 diploid, tetraploid. And it's probably going to be leaning towards the late heading varieties because they're going to suit the grazing system that little bit better.
Okay, I just see one last question there. Someone put in, why the need for timothy, or what does timothy bring to the mix as a non-ryegrass?
I suppose the department have specified that there has to be a secondary grass other than just perennial ryegrass in the mixture. So in the department specification, it has to be 6.6 kilos of perennial ryegrass and 0.7 of another grass. And I suppose timothy is the most obvious one. That's it's working, on Irish farms. Cocksfoot does work in drier ground, but it's not very palatable mid-season. So that's why most people are leaning towards timothy, because it ticks the box, I suppose, from meeting the department scheme requirements. But it's also a very palatable grass. Grows well in the spring. Grows well in during wetter weather and things like that, or colder weather. So it does have a bit to offer there. It's only at 0.7 of the mixture overall, I suppose, as well. So it's small enough in terms of its overall contribution.
Okay, thanks very much, Mary, for the moment. As said there, folks, at the end of the page, there's a Q&A box there. We can type in your questions and we'll gladly answer them during the course of the presentation. So I suppose we're moving on now to our host farm for the night. So our host farmer tonight is Jack Healy from Clone in Ballyragget, County Kilkenny. I said at the outset, we had hoped to have this on farm, but because of circumstances beyond our control, we're doing here on a webinar tonight. So we'll introduce Jack Healy. And Jack, maybe first of all, you talk us through the first slide there, just what's happening out in Clone in Ballyragget in North Kilkenny.
Hi everyone. My name is Jack Healy and I'm farming in partnership with my parents, Mary and James Healy. We're milking about 340 to 350 cows, and the followers are on the farm as well. We started doing the multi-species in 2021. We put in more last year and we'll be putting in a bit more this year again.
Okay, so look, what I'm going to do really, we're going to ask Jack a few questions here, 8 questions maybe, and photographs that you're looking at, folks, are from the Healy farm. So I suppose you can just imagine that you're actually on the farm, and maybe sometime soon we'll have an on-farm demonstration or look at the sward. So Jack, you know, the first question I suppose on the screen there, you know, you said you're 320, 340 cow herd, doing, you know, nearly 500 kilos of milk solid. So I suppose the question I think I'd like to ask any starting off is, why multi-species swards on the farm? Where did the interest come from?
I suppose the main interest came about in 2018 when we hit the drought. We were particularly hit that year because we were restricted and we had extra stock, and our farm was very, very dry. We're basically on a sandpit, I suppose, in North Kilkenny. So I suppose I was doing a bit of research into it, and I decided to try and increase the soil organic matter of the farm, because at every percentage increase in soil organic matter, you can hold, I think it's about 200,000 litres of water per hectare. So it's kind of, the idea is, I suppose, to create kind of a buffer there for the periods of drought on the farm, kind of as a drought mitigation strategy. That was the kind of primary reason, I suppose, for looking at the multi-species. There are a couple of other benefits as well, the anthropometric properties as well, to be used as to reduce the use of warmers. I suppose in the last couple of years, the fertilizer prices have gone through the roof as well, so that's another added benefit too.
Okay, excellent.
Kind of
So
trace element.
So 2018, the drought year, that was the start off point anyway. Very good.
That was it, yeah.
Okay, so look, just moving on, I suppose, to question 2 then. The lads started sowing grass seed there in 2021, or multi-species sward. So look, I suppose just for your own point, just explain to us the methods of establishment, maybe a comment on post-sowing management, weed control, the things that Mary touched on there, maybe just your own experiences with the multi-species sward out in Clone in Ballyraggett there.
Yeah, I suppose we established it kind of differently to what Mary's suggesting there. I'm not saying that's probably the best or most recommended way of doing it. We decided to do it with no sprays or anything beforehand. We just grazed it fairly tightly and then disked it, and then went with the power harrow kind of lightly. We learned a kind of couple of things from doing it the first year. We probably didn't go hard enough with the rotavator the first year, and then went slightly harder the second, or around the headlands. Actually, we kind of discovered it by mistake, really. But when we use a slight bit more tillage, it actually established a lot better. So last year, then we did that, and we got a much better establishment with it last year. So as I said, we didn't use any sprays at all, and we were able to get back into it then kind of a lot quicker altogether, because the sward was coming back through. We used our calves then to keep down the grass competition, as the sward was kind of as it was growing. So yes. we rotated the calves around then from each of the fields, just to keep the competition down, and then kind of let it get up to a certain height, and then started grazing it then with the cows.
So that was kind of your weed control too, you could say, cultural methods, grazing, yeah. Very good.
Yeah, there was, like, we did use mechanical weed control as well. I mean, it does get a bit messy for the first while. Like, it looks very unsightly when it is growing at the start. Like, we topped it a couple of times because it gets kind of quite strong. So I mean, it's a bit of a mindset change as well. Like, it's completely different to looking at a lovely kind of
green sward.
perennial ryegrass sward, but it's, you know, it's a different. It requires different different management techniques, I suppose, and it's different to look at, I suppose. So that's the, once you can get your head around that, I suppose it's fine.
Okay. And any issue with kind of any weeds, you know, since over the last 2 years, then the Swards, so on 2 years ago, there's a grazing, just keep it all under check, basically, you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, like, you do have to top it the odd time. Like if you get a few thistles and stuff through it, like like that field you're looking at in the photo there actually did have a quite high dock burden in it beforehand. There's still the odd one through it. Like, it's, you know, it's, I'm not going to say there's no docks in it, but they do say that the chicory kind of has a similar root structure. Like, it's a tap root as well as the dock, and that kind of is supposed to outcompete the that's supposed to like outcompete the docks a bit. So
okay, very good.
What we've seen anyway.
Okay, so it's moving on then, I suppose, just the next question, I suppose. We're not going into the detail or where they came from, but, you know, I think you said there you use a large number of varieties in the first mix 2 years ago, so maybe comment on that. What you're using.
Our first year, we like, some of the research suggests that you get with the more species you use, the kind of more biomass you get. So we decided to put in a 14 species mix the first year, and then just, I suppose, to see if we could adjust our management techniques to try and get some more of those species to take. So I suppose we kind of went into it with a fairly open mind and tried to extend out the grazing, the rotation length a good bit longer than you normally would in a perennial ryegrass sward. I suppose they do say that a lot of the herbs will grow for the first year and then they're gone after that, after they've kind of added their benefits to the soil. The second year, then we heard about the grant system, so we went for the 6 species mix for that. I suppose the 6 species mix is kind of made up of what does tend to stay in the mix anyway. So I suppose whether the other herbs actually have a benefit is still up for debate, really, I suppose.
Okay. Just I might bring back Dr. Mary McAvoy there for a comment there, maybe on that. Should we go for, you know, cocktail mixes, or do you think the six variety mixes is more than adequate, Mary?
Yeah, so the 6 species, I think, from any of the research in, you know, in UCD or any of the research we're doing ourselves in German Horizon, it is shown to be what's delivering probably in the sward. When we incorporated extra species, sometimes they didn't establish or they didn't make any great contribution to the sward overall, that the benefit of putting them in there in the first place was questionable. And I think that's probably why the department went down to 6 species mixture, because, you know, as Jack said there, you know, they are probably the ones that are lasting on farms and probably performing the best in terms of, you know, Irish climate conditions in particular. I suppose the balance is, you know, are you doing it from a production perspective and trying to feed animals, or are you doing it from a increased biodiversity on your farm? And if it's from a production benefit, I think the 6 species mixture is probably the way that, you know, you're going to get the biggest return. If biodiversity is more important and you're trying to, you know, do more for pollinators and things like that, by all means, you know, there's probably benefit going with an extra species in, because you probably won't be grazing it as hard, so you won't be challenging some of those weaker herbs within the mixture as much, probably.
Okay, so standard mixes are available from yourselves and other people there, and anything people want, or the set mix.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I need to see companies carrying the department specification mix, but, you know, you kind of get additional herbs, and the department have specified this year that if you do want to put additional herbs into the mixture, or clovers, that, you know, that you can put some additional herbs and clovers into the mixture, and they'll still make the payment, assuming that the base mixture of that 12 kilo mixture, which I outlined, and I know you're going to talk about again, Pat, assuming that base mixture is there on a per acre basis.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mary. So maybe back to Jack there now. I suppose let's move on to the next question there. Jack, I suppose any comments you'd make on, you know, cow performance while grazing the multi-species swards?
Yeah, I suppose the cows, there's not a major difference in performance. I mean, when it's kept to probably around 2,200 kilos dry matter, they tend to go up a bit in milk yield. All right, they do drop if you put them into a really high cover. Like we, with the 14 species mix, we did experiment around with going much higher because the multi-species swards can hold on to their quality a lot longer than the perennial ryegrass. So we tried to push that out a bit last year to see how that would work in practice and see how far you actually could push the boat out with that. They do drop a little bit in yield doing that, but we wanted to see if we could kind of like a deferred grazing, I suppose, is what we were trying to do with that particular field in the picture there. So that was pushed right out. I mean, if you go too far out, it does drop in the milk, all right. But like a few days ago, then we were grazing it, and the milk yield was gone up a good bit. So it was a noticeable difference in the parlour. Took a good bit longer to milk them. But never a bad complaint.
Okay, very good. Look, we'll go through some figures later on from Johnson and Castle. But look, I suppose just get Jack's story for tonight. I suppose question 5, and we're nearly there. I suppose the questions, general comments, grazing management, pre-grazing yields, rotation length. So there's 2 photographs again from the farm there, the Wellington on the left and the grey sward on the right. So just your own comments there, Jack. Yeah,
so I suppose we're like one of the main challenges with the multi-species is actually quantifying how much is actually growing. It's quite like we normally measure our grass with the plate meter. We were doing the same then with the multi-species because it's not really any accurate way to measure it. We did cut and weigh it another time. I think Pat was out on the farm on a farm walk here a good while ago, and I think when we cut and weighed it, we actually got a slightly more dry matter than what we had estimated with the plate meter. So I suppose we probably weren't too far out with it. So I mean that was a little bit reassuring, but that's I suppose like we were aiming for around 2,000, I suppose 2,200 kilos. I suppose what you'd normally look at in a perennial ryegrass. I suppose that's the comparison we were trying to go into, I suppose.
So the photograph on the left there, the Wellington, that's that photograph.
Yeah, that's probably a little bit too. That's probably around that or a little bit lower than that. We were grazing a lot higher than that last year with the 14 species mix, but we were trying to leave a little bit more grass behind as well. We were trying to leave around kind of 300 or 400 kilos in the field behind the cows, just to try and I suppose the multi-species don't really like being grazed down too tightly, I suppose. So that's we were always kind of trying to leave a little bit behind to try and help some of the herbs to establish properly.
And any idea, like your normal or your target rotation length with the multi-species sward, what do you think is the ideal from what you've seen?
We were varying it quite a lot. Like 30 days is probably way too long, I suppose. I suppose anyway, I think Mary mentioned there anywhere from 23 to 28. You do get like the further you leave it, you do get a huge kind of surge in grass growth. Like you can get kind of 200 kilos a day grass growth once it gets longer, I suppose. So you do get kind of a fairly exponential growth after a while. But if you do leave it, if you leave it kind of too long, then the quality of it obviously deteriorates.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I suppose this is just an interesting photograph. Maybe you can talk us through it here. This is from the fields where you looked at the difference in soil biology. So I'll let you talk us through what we see on the left and the right there.
Yeah, I suppose these are my very very crude experiments on farm. I'm not a scientist, and I don't really claim to be one. If anyone else has any if there's any researchers out there online at the moment that would like to do any experiments on the soil biology side of things, I'd be more than willing to let them use the farm as a lab, I suppose. But so I suppose the left the left photo there is the bottom left where the shovel is just the control. I suppose it's a perennial ryegrass sward, and then probably about 10 foot away. So I just dug a hole in each field with the wire as a division between the two fields. And the top of that left photo is the multi-species. That's so I just dug and just did a very kind of basic, just a worm count, how many worms per shovelful in the field, and I got about kind of 6 or 8 worms in the perennial ryegrass sward. That's kind of I did a couple of different test spots around the field as well, but and we got about kind of 48 or 50 worms in the multi-species swards. So I did notice as well, there's a lot across the multi-species, and even this year as well. I dug a few of them there yesterday as well, and that you do tend to get a lot of the kind of the bigger worms. I'm not sure the names of them, but they're kind of they dig a lot deeper down in the soil and kind of bring up and down nutrients through the soil. So there's a lot
huge.
of, sorry.
So you got in your own experiment there. Look, it's very visual there, the photo on the right. So you got an eightfold increase in worm count.
Yeah.
Okay. And that obviously helps for drainage, etc., and building up organic matter in the soil. So look, just the second last question for Jack then. I suppose Mary's touched on there. Have you any comments to make? I know you've only got swards there that are coming into their 3rd year. So any comments on changes in sward competition over the years?
Yeah, I suppose it's still early days with the trial on farm here. We, like with the 14 species mix, we were trying to adjust our management to try and hold on to the chicory and plantain as long as possible. It does seem to be staying a little bit, but like it is definitely the chicory is definitely reducing in it anyway. It does tend to kind of bulk up a little bit. Or getting towards that 27 or 28 days, it does tend to come back through the sward. Like, I mean, if you looked at the sward there at the moment, it's starting to come back again. But there's definitely less chicory in it. But whether our management changes will improve that over time, I don't know.
Yeah, so Mary's made the comments about the chicory having after at the end of the year too. Obviously, it's on the wane, and obviously, I suppose the proportion of cutting and grazing probably has helps it too. So yeah, thanks for that one, Jack. So that's the last question, I suppose. Really, question 8 there with the dairy unit, the background there. So what are your plans for multi-species swards on the farm this year and beyond? You'll do more.
Yeah, I'd like to keep going with it anyway. Like, I mean, we're seeing huge benefits in drought times anyway. Like last August there, where everything else was kind of burnt up. The multi-species was kind of the only thing on the farm that was green. So it does seem to be pulling up. It does seem to be pulling up some of the nutrients and stuff, and is storing a lot more moisture in the ground, which is kind of a huge benefit to where we are anyway, for keeping the moisture in the ground. Like there are pros and cons to it as well. So it's I don't want to jump fully into it either. It's something that needs to be kind of observed over time to see if it'll work longer term, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, I think as Mary, you said earlier on, Mary, at the end of the day, you will still be left with a grass clover sward. Is that what you're seeing, I suppose? Mary, you want to make a comment there? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So yeah, what we're seeing, I suppose, with guys who haven't maybe in for 4 years to plant, like the chicories probably is almost gone. There's some plantain left, but I mean, essentially, and I should have probably put a picture up, and I didn't, but essentially what we're looking at is good grass clover swards. Look, I mean, assuming the management has been right along the journey of the multi-species sward, I suppose, Pat, and assuming the soil fertility and all the rest has been kept right, as you go along.
Okay, so look, just Jack or Mary, when you're on there, just a few questions to come in there. One there, maybe Jack or Mary. The question is, how about making hay from multi-species swards? Anyone comment or experience? We can make silage from it, as you said there. Any comment on making hay from it if that happened?
Yeah, look, I suppose, Jack, you can jump in on this as well if you want. I suppose I think you can make hay from plantain, chicory, not so much, okay? And these are lower in dry matter compared to, you know, our standard grass swards as well. So it is going to be a lot more difficult to dry them out to the level that we need to dry them out to. Do work quite well in silage, and quality of silage with multi-species is reasonably good, but probably wouldn't be what I'd be putting in for first choice if hay was important.
Okay. And just the next question about the same thing, I suppose, to do with if chicory declined, you know, what replaced the jack? Was the gap filled by ryegrass or clover? The chicory did decline out there in the sward over the last 2 years. Just one for Jack there.
Yeah, kind of ryegrass and clover, yeah, mainly. The chicory does stay in the sward from what I've seen so far, but it is still early days. But yeah, it's definitely less of it. But yeah, ryegrass and clover anyway is what I've seen here.
Okay. And the third question there, maybe from Mary or Jack there. Can plantain and chicory be reintroduced to the sward if the day out? So I suppose people are talking about, can you oversow with plantain and chicory, or any comment on that, Mary, from your experience?
Yeah, look, they can be oversown, but it can be hit and miss, Pat. So, you know, they're probably a lot more expensive than a grass seed or even a clover seed. And we do see very, very variable results with oversowing them. And I think it's also going to be difficult to get the level of plantain or chicory into the sward that we're going to get the benefit out through oversown. So I suppose for that reason, I wouldn't tend to recommend people to oversow them. Or certainly if they're doing them, you know, start with a small field rather than trying big areas. But look, I suppose we sell seed, that's all that we do. So it's in my interest to sell seed, but I tend not to recommend people to oversow them because I think it's just kind of a little bit too risky.
Okay. Okay, any other question there, Michael? I think there's a fourth question got in there.
Yeah, there's a question there about nitrogen, you know, level of nitrogen use on the multi-species, the same as the other perennial sward on Jack's farm, on your own farm, Jack. How much nitrogen being used on the multiples on the end of the multi-species swards compared to the rest of the normal swards?
None.
No, not absolutely none in the start of the year.
We didn't use any at all, even at the start of the year.
Okay, and slurry or powder washings?
It's getting watery slurry, yeah. That's all we put on it.
So no, apart from organic fertilizers, there's been no chemical put on those swards.
No.
Even from the first one there 2 years ago.
No, nothing at all.
Okay, so that's something to think about. So I'm going to show you some figures maybe from Johnstown Castle there in a moment. Okay, look, if there are no other questions, I'll just move on there and we'll come back to Jack and Mary again. And thanks, Jack, for your contributions thus far. So I suppose I'm just going to give one side here about what is the research experience of multi-species swards. So down in Johnstown Castle in Wexford, some of you were down there last September. They have a lot of ongoing work down there, and maybe it might be a place you might be interested in visiting some part of the year with your discussion group. So look, just again, thanks to my colleagues, Bridget Lynch and Aidan Lawless there from Johnstown Castle. To just, you know, so in summary, I suppose what's happening down in Johnstown Castle, they're comparing grass clover swards versus multi-species. So in the first year, starting at the bottom of the page, where they just incorporated the grass clover and the multi-species, you can see the type of tonnage there in dry matter, 15 tons versus 13.9. And really, I suppose in year one, as you'll see here, the grass clover sward was really treated as a perennial ryegrass sward, where they put on, you would call it the standard book value of 234 kilos of nitrogen. But you can see in 2020, you know, Jack says no nitrogen. These swards only received 80 kilos, which is 64 units of chemical nitrogen in the whole year. And you see there they grew close on 14 tons. If we fast forward into the year 2021, the same swards, 14.7 tons dry matter versus 14.4. That's just a breakdown of what was grazed and what was cut for silage off those swards. But again, you can see here, I suppose, getting more typical to our grass clover blueprint of 150 kilos of nitrogen applied on the grass clover sward versus 64 kilos. So multiply that by 0.8, you know, 50 units of nitrogen in the early part of the year. So, and then I suppose if you look at last year then, which was all swards were affected last year by the drought. But I suppose it's showing you there what is possible with a grass clover sward, but also what is more so possible in the early years at least, with literally 40 to 50 units of chemical nitrogen. And Jack, I suppose, has put his figure in at 0. So, you know, we can look at the meal feeding and the milk solids there as well as result. But I suppose it is showing you what's possible out there. And the question is, can we replicate at farm level? And Jack is replicated at zero nitrogen. So have you any comment when you look at that table, Jack, to make or what you see there in front of you from Johnstown Castle? Is it no nitrogen? Is it another leap of faith apart from looking at different herd profiles or profile of the sward, I should say?
Well, I'm not saying we're doing the right thing. That's what we're doing, and I'm not suggesting that everyone should do that. That's I suppose some of these trials you see that they're reducing the nitrogen, and there seems to be a kind of a better effect from it. So we said we try zero nitrogen on it. Some people are doing it with zero nitrogen as well and getting good results as well. So, you know, I suppose it's just a matter of trying to figure out a good way of measuring it is the biggest thing. Like it's from our crude measurements, it seems to be some of the most productive paddocks on the farm. The one that's in 2 years has we were getting 16 tons with it, and some of the other ones are 12 and 14 tons. That is a fairly crude measurement though, so it's using the plate meter. It's probably not the most accurate way of measuring it, but that's what we were kind of roughly getting with it anyway.
Okay, look, I said to you, that's just a bit of data there from a research point of view, and Jack has given his offering there, what's happening with zero nitrogen. So look, I'm going to conclude the talk, and we'll have a few more questions at the end there, so put them in the Q&A box at the end of the screen there. So I suppose the last thing I'm going to just talk about there briefly, just to go through in detail, what is the 2023 multi-species Department of Agriculture SWARD scheme. So there's a few key dates, first of all, which are highlighted there on the left of your screen. So basically, there's two parts to the application. You must apply for the actual scheme itself before the 29th of May, which is the same deadline for your BIS applications, which are ongoing at the moment, I'm sure in all the offices of Teagasc around the country, and County Kilkenny and Waterford. So as I'll show you, there's two things. You must apply for the multi-species sward measure on ag food separately. And then number two, when you're doing your BIS, or if you've already submitted your BIS, you need to amend the BIS, as I'll show shortly, by the 29th of May to actually show which parcels or plots are on, which are going to be incorporated into multi-species. And that's how the area for payment is actually identified to the department. The requirements there under the scheme is to sow the sward by the 15th of July. I suppose, Jack, there, maybe a quick question for you. What months did you sow your swards in there?
We sowed them in April and May.
Yeah.
30th of April, and then I think the 11th of May was we did ours.
So I suppose, look, from a clover establishment point of view, I suppose Mary can make a comment. You know, April and May are the prime months for anything to do with clover. You want to make any comment there, Mary, just on that for a minute?
Yeah, no, absolutely, they are, Pat. And I suppose for your multi-species herbs as well, like, you know, spring sown, I said it already, spring sown really sets them up well before you get into the back end. We definitely don't see them established as well when they're sown, you know, in late August and definitely into September. We see more problems again, so we'd always prefer to see them go in April or May.
One of the reasons was we've targeted this talk tonight on the 24th of April. Okay, so the fourth part then, as you see, you must claim the payment by the 31st of August. Last year, the payment was paid as a subsidy to the person supplying the seed. This year, it's a per hectare payment of €300 a hectare, or up to 300. So look, that's the first point. What are eligibility and scheme requirements? It's a payment of up to €300 a hectare, which is €121 per acre approx, which will cover the cost of seed, as Mary said earlier, and maybe something to go with it. And it's a land payment this year, not a per acre or per bag of seed, as it was in 2022. It must be sown at a minimum of 30 kilos of seed per hectare, which Mary alluded to, which is your standard 12 kilos to the acre at a minimum by the middle of July, on lands which are on your BIS 2023 application online. And I suppose, as I'll show you, it's very important that when you're doing your BIS application, you must declare the land, whether it be a full parcel or a plot, as either permanent pasture MSS measure, that's one of the designations, or if it's coming out of tillage, you must designate the parcel or plot as grass year one MSS measure. And I'll show you the screenshots shortly of what that looks like to make sure you make the correct declaration on your BIS application form. Land parcels that received the multi-species sward scheme money last year are not eligible. That's just to state the obvious maybe. And the payment is based on a minimum of 1 hectare and a maximum of 20 hectares. So look, I'm not going to go through this again, but that's the department specification and minimum requirement, which we covered already in detail. And those mixes are widely available. And as Mary said, they're all varieties of ryegrass and white clover must be on the department recommended list. I think at this stage, these mixes are widely available. So we've seen that before. So just go through then, I suppose, most of you would be working with your chagas or agricultural agent there to submit your bits. There's 2 application bits, and I suppose a very important thing, there are 2. So the first step, not in any order, but two steps to be followed. Step 1 is to apply on ag food before the 29th of May for the actual multi-species sward measure. So you see that listed off on your list of tabs on your BIS application with your advisor. But first of all, there's also the red clover silage measure, which is there, which we didn't talk about, which is another grant aid from the department. But you have to click on this tab here to apply for the multi-species sward measure premium. So when you do that, then you're presented with this page here. And really there's 1, 2, 3, there's 7 tick boxes there that you tick, and you press the submit button. So that's the first step in applying for the multi-species swards measure, MSSM 2023. If you don't tick these boxes or do this part of the application, you will not get the payment by just declaring the parcels on your BIS application. So it's vitally important you do the 2 steps. So that's step 1. Step 2 then is when you come to look at that parcel. So we're just pointing at this parcel here, doesn't matter what parcel County Kilkenny is in, that this parcel here, the farmer has decided he's going to put that parcel into multi-species sward. So when you open the crop declaration part of the page to change it from permanent pasture, you must select permanent pasture MSS measure. This is it's important. There are 3 MSS there, as you see listed. This is for people who are allocating or picking the multi-species sward as an eco-scheme measure. This is the one that must be ticked to designate the parcel for the €300 hectare. And the 3rd tab here is for existing permanent pasture, which contains multi-species swards. So very caution there, I said that you're ticking the right box. And just when I mentioned those there, I suppose, if you are availing or have to avail of the eco scheme or selling or sowing multi-species sward as an eco scheme measure, that land that you sow to meet the eco scheme requirement is not eligible for the premium of €300 hectare, that's what's there in the terms and conditions. For most farmers logged in tonight, they have adequate hedges, and they have enough hedges to get them over the 10% minimum requirement for space for nature. So they will be able to then apply for the permanent pasture multi-species sward, €300 per hectare. But just a caution there that there are 2 steps, step 1 and step 2. The claim procedure then later on, you've all that done before the 29th of May. Obviously, you must sow the crop before the 15th of July of 2023. You must use a specified seed mixture at a minimum. And then claims are uploaded, like the TAMS applications currently. The claims then must be uploaded on ag food before the 31st of August. So there's another date for your calendar. It's all dates, I'm afraid, but you must claim for the actual €300 hectare before the 31st of August. How is that claim done? It's done on the ag food system. And you see there, point number 4, you must upload 2 things. A, an invoice for the seed, and B, 1 seed label per mix or batch of seed purchases. And then at that stage, you will kind of, I suppose, confirm the actual area actually sown. So, you can apply for up to 20 hectares, but obviously when you come to the actual claim, you claim for what you sowed only. So it's a combination of two things there under point 4. And invoices and seed levels need to be retained on farm in the event of a department inspection. So that's and payments will fall in later. So that's really, I suppose, the claim procedure. The important point is you must apply for the scheme on the ag food tab, and then you must make sure you declare the parcel in the correct manner as I've shown you there previously. And again, if you've submitted your BIS at this stage, you can go back into your advisor, ring up the office, make an appointment, and get that person to amend your BIS application and apply for the multi-species sward measure. So look, really, that's all I'd say about the 3rd part there, the 2023 Department Multi-Species Sward Scheme. So really, we'll just take final questions for Mary, Jack, and myself. So is there anything there, Michael Fitzgerald there, who's operating in the background there?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions coming in there, Pat. Okay, so maybe this one for, maybe just give it to Jack first. How many grazings can you expect to get from the multi-species sward in the year?
Kind of, I suppose anywhere 8 or 9, I suppose, really. We were trying to push it out to grow it as long as possible to try to exploit the properties of the of when you get the kind of exponential growth with the multi-species, and we were trying to see if we could use it as deferred grazing. So I suppose by doing that we reduced it down to around 8 grazings. What we're doing this year then with the 6 species mix, we're trying to we're trying to graze it a little bit more often, kind of a slightly shorter rotation length. So we'll probably kind of we'll probably get 9 rotations out of this one, hopefully. I suppose you are losing a bit of time then earlier on in the year when you're establishing it too. And we were grazing it then with the calves as well during the year, which I suppose we were not really counting that as a full rotation. But
okay, anything else, Michael, there?
Yeah, I suppose, Jack, is it fair to say that from what I'm picking up from what you're saying, that because the farm is drought prone, that is that really your number one attraction?
Yeah, that's the number one attraction for me. Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, just a question just in relation to the scheme there, Pat. I think the answer be you kind of gone through there, but just to clarify, do you have to wait for approval before purchasing the seeds, or can you purchase and go ahead? This is this is last year it was linked to the merchant where you bought the seed. This year is linked to the base application and so on. Do you want to just clarify that?
So I suppose to clarify, once you've applied for the actual scheme, if you apply today or tomorrow, which is the 25th of April, you're free then to purchase after you actually applied for the scheme. Whereas if you bought all the seed, for example, last week, and now you're applying this week, well, in that case, then you're out because you bought the seed before the date of application. So that's the key thing. You cannot buy anything until after the date of application, not the date of approval. So obviously, apply first and then you can buy the seed, no problem. Because afterwards you will be, as I showed earlier, the claim procedure there on the screen there, you will be uploading your receipts and the seed label to claim your €300 per hectare. So obviously those dates you have to buy it, and after the date of application is perfectly fine.
Okay, and just another question there, back for Mary there, the organic seed mixtures for people farming organically. Is there any special mixes there available?
Yeah, so there is some organic grass seed available. I don't think there's any organic clovers or herbs available, but you will get there. You do have to apply for derogation, I suppose, and you will get derogation to use multi-species mixtures, which contains the organic grass, but not, it isn't hitting that 70%, which is normally the minimum that the organics will tolerate. It isn't hitting 70% organic because of essentially the level of grass versus clover in those mixtures. There's a lot less than 70% grass in it. But apply for derogation through your organic licensing body, and there's no issue in terms of getting mixtures suitable for organic for the multi-species or the red clover schemas for that matter.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Just another, Pat, back to you. Just find this question here. Kind of well, I won't say but just sort of some of the vagaries of the system. If you sowed a multi-species sward last year, can you apply for the red clover measure this year on the same parcel? I suppose I'm kind of assuming maybe that you just said maybe you didn't establish the multi-species sward very well last year, and you want to go back on with red clover on it this year. What's the idea?
No, I'm afraid again from the term conditions, the answer is no. That obviously you're applying on basically fresh ground, whether that's land coming with tillage or land that was in lay last year. But if you sowed multi-species sward there last year, the term conditions are saying a bit similar. You cannot apply for the premium again this year on a crop that was sown last year. I suppose I could say, raise a comment. I had no applications for the red clover measure this year or last year so far. So I think the big interest that I'm getting at the moment anyway is in the multi-species sward. So if there's anything different that we'll clarify it to that person. But as far as I'm reading there, no, it's you're buying the seed for this year and you're starting from scratch in a sward that's not in a multi-species sward last year.
Yeah, just Pat, I had a personal client just talking to me today, and he had applied last year for the multi-species, applied but didn't actually see it through. Put it on his application, but didn't start to see it through then afterwards. Where does he or she stand in terms of maybe going at it again this year?
But you were saying they applied last year, but didn't actually carry out the operation at all.
Yeah.
But sure, they're back to square one. They're fine. They're going
fine,
to
yeah. Okay.
applying the ag food and amend their BIS application. So again, just to make the point in part that both things are done, because over the years, some of these schemes, even the tillage incorporation measure that was there last year, or tillage incentive scheme, sorry, there's two sides parts of the application. You must complete both or you will not get your payment. So any other questions, Michael? That's really it, I think. Is it anyone wants to come in there?
Yeah, that's what I have here in a bit, Pat.
Look, it's just gone 9 o'clock. If there's no further questions, and I suppose if there are further questions, you can just pick up the phone tomorrow to your local Chocos office or to German there and talk to Mary McAvoy. So before we conclude, I wanted to most sincerely thank you for attending yourselves tonight. I want to thank Dr. Mary McAvoy from Germinal, who gave us very insightful talk on the agronomy of the crop. A special thanks to Jack Healy from Clone. So well done to Jack there. You can relax now, Jack. For coming on board there to share your experiences on what's happening on the farm. So thanks very much for your contribution, and hopefully I'll give you some insight there into the 2023 Department Multi-Species Sward. And I want to thank Michael Fitzgerald, my own colleague here in the office, for the question and answer session there, and also Mark Trimble, who's in the background making sure that all the technology is working. So look, thanks very much and good night. This recording is being recorded and will be up on the Chocos YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So with that, safe sowing, and until we talk to you again, and make sure you get your BIS applications in before the 29th of May. Get on the phone if you haven't gotten a piping so far, and have that discussion with your advisor about multi-species swards for your farm in 2023. So good night, one and all.